It's Tuesday. It would help if I put on my glasses. Tuesday, June 25th. Tonight, the Eugene Planning Commission is meeting. Primarily, our focus is the second day of deliberations on an appeal of the hearings official's tentative approval for Braywood Hills, 3rd edition, phases 5 and 6 PUD, City File PDT 18-4. And we reserve some time at the beginning of the hearing, or the deliberations, excuse me, for any public comment. And remember, public comment just has to not address any elements or components of the Braywood Hills 3rd edition phases. Lauren always says it much nicer, but I'll put it out there because I'm not sure that anybody's here. Okay, so I'm getting nods, so it's not really, it's okay that I didn't say it as eloquent as I could have. So we'll move to deliberations. I'm going to have Lauren start because there is an additional piece that we're going to add tonight in terms of procedural items.
Thank you, Chair Taylor. So there is a quick procedural item that I'd like to walk through with the commission before we get back into deliberations. You'll find, I think each of you at your seat has a copy of an email that we received this afternoon from the applicant's attorney, making some objections to some of the evidence and argument that were provided to the Planning Commission at the public hearing. I have provided you a copy of the email, even though the evidentiary record in this appeal is closed, because the applicant has the ability to make, well, parties have the ability to make procedural objections even after the close of the evidentiary record, and in fact must do so if they want to preserve those objections at LUBA. So if the applicant had not made the objection to you, then they would not be able to raise it at LUBA. And I have reviewed the email, and I do not believe that there is anything in the email that would constitute new evidence or new argument. It's simply the applicant pointing out the evidence and argument already submitted to the commission that the applicant believes is either new evidence that the commission shouldn't consider or are arguments outside of the scope of the appeal issues identified by the applicant. So I thought I would just sort of walk you through the applicant kind of goes testimony by testimony. So the first thing that the applicant mentions is an email submitted by Mr. Liebert on June 16th. Applicant argues that it includes both new issues and evidence related to those issues. Staff has reviewed that email. You are certainly welcome to do so too. It is in the record. I do not believe that it includes any new evidence, and the issues raised relate to the 40% open space and 20% slope, both of which are at issue in this appeal. The Dow email, same thing. I've reviewed it. I don't see any new evidence, and the argument in that email relates to 40% slope, 20% open space, the applicant's request for an additional condition that would allow consolidation of lots after the tentative PUD approval. I didn't see anything outside of the scope of the issues raised by the applicant. The Butler email we discussed yesterday, or the Butler submission rather, and you have already rejected as new evidence the photographs included in that submission. Otherwise, there are certainly arguments in that submission, some of which may be outside the scope of the issues raised by the applicant on appeal. But again, as we discussed yesterday, you don't need to formally reject arguments that are outside of the scope of the appeal, but you should not consider them. And again, the PowerPoint submitted by Larry Smith, again, we discussed that yesterday. You did formally reject the new evidence that was included in that PowerPoint. There are arguments included in that PowerPoint that are outside the scope of the issues raised by the applicant. And again, as we discussed, you should not consider those. So I believe that the commission's not required to do anything additional to respond to this email from the applicant, but I wanted to provide it to you and to give you the opportunity to ask any questions if you have any.
Are there any questions?
Great, thank you very much.
Yes. So we'll move to, hopefully, I am so sorry. I hope everybody received a couple times the email that I sent. I was having issues for some reason sending the Planning Commission emails. So thank you. And I once again apologize if it went to an email you normally wouldn't expect it to. So Steve, or Commissioner Baker, I want to give you an opportunity and I had kind of thrown out there, was thinking about 10 minutes to just go over thoughts, comments. You don't have to take all that time, but just, yeah. And first, can I double check? Did you watch?
Yeah, I watched the,
So you're prepared to be here today? Okay, great, thank you.
so I'm really only going to speak to the appeal issue 3.
Okay.
'Cause
May I interrupt for just a moment? Both
Yes,
Chair
sorry.
Taylor and Commissioner Baker, my suspicion is that the microphone is not picking up what
Okay, great.
you're saying.
Okay, yeah,
Okay,
we probably have to have it closer.
Okay, perfect.
And we need to speak louder.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay,
Were you getting buzzed or something down? Yeah.
No, I just can barely hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect.
Although I did just get buzzed, but not about that.
so I'll mainly speak to appeal issue number 3, which deals with the 20% slope grading limitation for needed housing. And first off, I wanted to, as a general comment, I think the hearings official bent over backwards to approve this tentative PUD with a huge number of conditions rather than reject it. I mean, that's my interpretation of reading through this. I mean, they really went, bent over backwards. The applicant at any time could have applied in the discretionary path and eliminated or potentially eliminated many of these issues. The 20% slope grading limitation, I don't think that the applicant submitted adequate information to show that that could be done with just excavation. And I don't think still photographs will show you that you can take a site and just excavate it and end up with a finished grade. And I agree with Commissioner Fragala's perspective on those 2 lots that are on the main street there, where you have to plow through an area that is greater than 20% slope. And I'm thinking back to when this Southeast study was done and completed, the implication was that they didn't really want you to build. If you used the needed housing statute, they didn't want you to disturb the soil on the 20% areas that had a greater than 20% slope. There was a reason for that. Obviously, Dogami considers anything over 25% a slide issue. And again, I worked for state government for many years in handling building, several $100 million worth of building for the state of Oregon. So I'm very familiar with the building construction process, having been involved with it for 40 years. Now, we can say that you can do some activity by, quote, excavation. And I think you could make a case for that if you were providing, you're going to dig a hole. Doesn't matter if the hole is too deep or if it's a little too wide. You're going to pour concrete footing that's going to, you're putting something on pilings. If the concrete piling is a little bigger or a little deeper than it needed to be, that's okay. And maybe you could make a case that you could dig a trench for a utility pipe without grading. But I think the issue here is, and I think lots 2 and 3 are a good example of that, you can't really do that in the real world. We can make believe that you can do that in the real world with just excavation. But, it's just a fairy tale. Again, you're going to come in there with not manual equipment, but automated, power equipment, a backhoe or a plow or some kind, and you're going to plow through that. That's going to disturb the slope on either side. And you're not going to want to have a driveway where the sides come down really steeply. It's an unstable situation. So you're going to have to grade the sides of that off to some slope to make it usable. Now, I think it theoretically could have been possible in the 1800s using hand labor, where you literally drop rock from a bucket, onto a site. If you literally hand-placed rock and whatever, you might theoretically, by our strange definition that we've adopted now, be able to build, through those areas with, quote, just excavation. I just don't think it's possible with the current technology that we use for construction. And I don't think the evidence is adequate. A couple of still photographs does not show you that you could do it. And I give an example of what happens if someone takes video of the construction during the process from the street and shows that there's activity going on that is not excavation. Do they submit that to the building department and say that the building doesn't comply? I would have felt more comfortable about this if I'd seen a video showing that you could literally do this kind of activity without any grading. I just don't think that that's possible. And again, those are, that's my main concern, is that I don't think that the evidence submitted to the record is adequate. I think our definitions, the way we've adopted them, don't make sense in the long run. The whole purpose of this was to prevent, if you had a choice, you didn't disturb the soil on slopes that are 20% or greater. So you built around them. And so now we're saying, well, yeah, you could dig a hole. You could dig a trench for a utility pipe. Now we're saying you could do driveways, which is a little different thing, because you're not going to just excavate and leave it the way it is. You're going to have to grade the sides off so they don't fall back into the driveway later on. So, I mean, that's my perspective on that. So I don't agree with the other planning commissioners on changing on sort of essentially eliminating the 20% grading limitation in the ECC. And I don't think it's adequate to say that the applicants could submit a letter saying that they would only excavate and not touch the 20% slope areas otherwise. That, again, we're just dealing with semantics there. We're not dealing with the real world. So we can continue on. Yeah, and again, over time, the planning, this whole business of planning and building, it's gotten more litigious and, more about getting details. So you have to get the wording exactly right. Otherwise, you create these situations where, you're sort of backed into a corner. So otherwise, I generally agreed with the Planning Commission, except on Appeal Issue 3, and then I'll stop there.
Okay, are there any additional comments from Planning Commission before we move into kind of looking at the final order? Okay, so staff, do you want to talk about the final order? Is there anything? And then if you saw anything that you have to say before we have questions from Planning Commission.
We sent a copy of this to you earlier today. We sent you both a track changes version, which is a little colorful, as I mentioned, and a version where it's showing those actually already having been accepted. And so we also recommended that if you had any edits that you thought needed to be made, if you could please provide those, specific edits. Otherwise, we believe it captures your discussions, deliberations, and direction that you provided yesterday, specifically related to Appeal Issue number 3.
Planning Commission, do you have any questions? Any edits that you saw that were needed? No. Okay, I just wanted to, I thought it was, thank you, it was well done. I mean, I think it was well representative of what our discussion was. So would someone like to make a motion?
I move let me pull it up here so I have the wording correct. I move to approve the final order of the Eugene Planning Commission on the appeals hearing of the official tentative approval for Braywood Hills 3rd Edition Phases 5 and 6 PUD, PDT 18-4.
Any seconds?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor? Are there any discussion? Sorry. He's always my Robert's Rule of Order. I always look at John, or excuse me, Commissioner Borowski. Yeah, Commissioner Baker.
Yes, so I assume we're approving the draft document. So I'm not in favor of approving this because of, I disagree with appeal issue, changes made to appeal issue 3.
Okay. Any other discussion items? Okay, all those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, it's 4 in favor, 1 opposed. Are there any other than obviously me signing it, are there any other items?
I will note that Monday's meeting, you no longer need to hold. We were holding that just in case this appeal took longer. So there's a meeting on July 1st is canceled. You do have a public hearing on the evening of July 2nd.
Okay, Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. I would just like to bring something up at this point. Even though he's not here, this would have been Commissioner Randall's last meeting of the Planning Commission, and I just wanted to put on the record how much I enjoyed working with Commissioner Randall. He brought a lot of knowledge and integrity to the commission in the 5 years that I worked with him. I was always eager to hear what he had to say. He brought a real-world touch to the commission because he was an architect that lived and used the code, but also listened to and heard what the public had to say. He also was an advocate for smaller homes, as having built one of his own, an ADU, so he brought a very real-world take to that discussion when we were talking about the whole ADUs and the setbacks and all that kind of stuff. He could say, well, you know, I had to deal with this when I was building my ADU, and so I just wanted to let it be known that we appreciated everything he did I think he was on it 8 or 12 years. He chaired for a couple of years while I was on, and I really appreciate everything that he did for this commission and for the city.
Commissioner Borowski, thank you for bringing that up. I hope we have an opportunity. Actually, I've been communicating with him kind of on the side and something else. So I think he has intention of actually coming and saying goodbye. I won't speak on his behalf, but I will encourage that, yes.
We're actually planning, with his consent, a going away party for him since he was unable to make these last several meetings. So
Great.
you will all be invited to that
Great, thank you, staff.
later this summer, I think.
That's great.
I don't know.
That's great. That's right, we'll have to take minutes.
Only 3 of you can come
Yeah, only 3 of us can come. That's right.
at a time.
So I agree. Thank you, Commissioner Borowski. That was well said, and I would second that. Yeah. All those in favor? Okay. You're right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's it.
Unless there's any other.
Yeah, if there's any other gavel? I know everybody loves that gavel, but I've learned that actually it's not really totally necessary. It's necessary for the guy, right? So any other comments, questions? Okay, the meeting's adjourned.